What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue with our 2025 predictions for the upcoming 2025 college football season. Up next is the TCU Horned Frogs. TCU coming off a pretty good year last year, coming off a sneaky and quiet 9-4 type season last year in 2024. It was definitely a much better year compared to where they were in 2023 after missing a bowl game that year, just going 5-7. But they definitely turned things around in 2024. Can they live up to the expectations like they did last year in 2025? Well, before we get into the predictions for this team, first just some thoughts on this TCU team. You look at the offensive side of the football, Josh Hover is back at quarterback. Obviously had a pretty decent year last year for TCU. I think he has a chance to be, once again, pretty solid for this TCU football team in 2025. Running backs look pretty solid for TCU. The offensive line, maybe that's the one area I have concerned about this TCU offense. They don't really have a ton of depth there on the offensive line, but maybe they can get it straightened out as the season goes along, so they're just going to have to avoid injuries at best. And then you look at the wide receiver position. They added some nice pieces in the transfer portal there on the wide receiver position. So yeah, that's definitely going to help out TCU a lot in the passing game. And then you look at this defense. I think this defense will be pretty solid. It's not going to be one of the best defenses in the Big 12, but it definitely should be right there as a decent defense in 2025. And you never know, TCU might become a dark horse team in the Big 12. Here is their schedule coming up for 2025. Again, TCU coming off a sneaky 9-4 season last year in 2024. So let's go game by game, and I'll give you my official prediction for this TCU football team for 2025. And they're going to open things up on Labor Day night on September 1st with a road game at North Carolina on that Labor Day night. So this is the Labor Day night game this year. North Carolina on the road. This is going to be a very tough game here for TCU, especially when it's played on the road. You look at this North Carolina team, a lot of hype around this team. There's so many storylines heading into this game for both of these teams. First off, you got North Carolina, Bill Belichick taking over. This kind of does remind me of, when Deion Sanders first came here to Colorado, obviously, and TCU is playing another first-year head coach. So TCU is 0-1 against first-year head coaches that we don't really know a ton about what they're going to do for their program. So yeah, North Carolina is a team that definitely has a lot of question marks. They're going to have a lot of new faces, but they're going to have playmakers, if that does make sense. This is going to be a pretty exciting game. I think it will be a competitive game. It could really go either way. It could be like one of those shootouts, or it could be one of those low-scoring defensive games. And I've kind of been back and forth on this game. I just don't know who to choose. TCU, I think, is the more talented team. I don't know who's more talented. I think TCU definitely has more playmakers, but it is on the road at North Carolina. So with that being said, I think home field advantage will be the difference here. I think it's a competitive Labor Day night game, and I think Bill Belichick gets his first win here for North Carolina. So I think TCU does lose a close game against North Carolina here on September the 1st on Labor Day night. I wouldn't be surprised if TCU did win this game, because I think, the winner of this game probably goes on to be that top dark horse in their conference, and then the loser probably still has to make it to a bowl game at best. But yeah, TCU, that's a pretty tough game to start out the year, especially when you're playing on the road. But I got this team starting off 0-1, and they actually get a bye week right after that North Carolina game, I guess, to, recover after playing a weeknight Monday game. So they will play Abilene Christian, an FCS team. I think they take care of business in that one, and I got them improving to 1-1 coming out of the bye week on September the 13th. And then after that, they play another Power 4 team in SMU on September 20th. And they actually have a couple of ACC opponents here in the non-conference. I think they're going to split these two. I think they beat SMU, but then lose to North Carolina. I think this SMU game will be a pretty close game, but I think TCU definitely will win this one because they're playing at home. I think they're going to want to run the football in this game and keep that SMU offense off the field for as long as possible. So I think TCU gets the win here. So I got them improving to 2-1. Like I said, I think they split those two games. They lose to North Carolina on the road and then SMU at home. So that does make sense. You win your home game and then you lose your road game at best. After that, they open up conference play on the road on September 27th at Arizona State. Very tough game to start out Big 12 play here for TCU. Arizona State's a very tough place to play. The Sun Devils, I think, are going to be really good this year. They absolutely could be the favorite to win the Big 12, and they they have a lot coming back. So I think Arizona State is definitely the better team. Maybe this game is close in the first half, but second half, that's where Arizona State starts to put up the tempo. And I think the Sun Devils get the win. So I'm going to say that Arizona State wins this one by at least by double digits, like 10 to 13 points, somewhere in that point range. So I got TCU dropping now to 2-2. And then they play at home against Colorado on October the 4th. And speaking of Colorado, TCU is very familiar with this team. They met a couple of years ago as non-conference opponents, and Colorado came out of nowhere and beat TCU on the road. This time TCU is playing them at home again a couple years later. Kind of surprised that they're playing at home in this one, but this is a Colorado team that will still be really good. They still got playmakers on the roster, but I just don't know if they'll be as good as they were from last year with Travis Hunter and, Shadir Sanders gone. So that's kind of good news there for TCU. Their defense doesn't really have to, go up against, Shadir Sanders, but still, they got Caden Salter, a quarterback that can definitely do some damage, but still, I think TCU playing at home is going to get revenge on this Colorado team. I know they definitely have not forgotten about losing to Colorado a couple years ago, before Colorado was even a member of the Big 12. So I think TCU in a pretty close game. They get the win here over Colorado, probably because of their running game. So I got TCU improving to 3-2. And then they play on the road at Kansas State on October the 11th. Kansas State, they're a well-coached team as always. These two teams, of course, 3 years ago met in the Big 12 championship. Things have kind of, were different here between these two teams. Kansas State, I feel like, has been more better than TCU ever since that Big 12 championship matchup, because, a couple years ago, TCU took a bit of a step back from where they were that year, and then Kansas State still ended up being a pretty solid team. They didn't make it to the Big 12 championship last year, but playing on the road, that's a pretty tough place to play. I think it will be a competitive game between these two well-coached teams, but I'm going to go with Kansas State here just because of the home field advantage. So I think Kansas State gets the win over TCU. That drops the Horned Frogs now to 3-3. And then they play Baylor at home on October the 18th. I done my Baylor video from yesterday, and I did pick TCU to win this game. I think it's one of those upset alert type games. Baylor comes in, as an experienced team. They're getting all that hype this year as being the top dark horse team in the Big 12. And TCU is not getting talked about a bunch. So I think TCU proves those, haters wrong, and I think they get a big upset win over this Baylor team, a veteran, experienced Baylor team. They're playing at home, so I think TCU will definitely win this game. So I'm going to go with TCU to get the win, but I wouldn't be surprised if Baylor did pull off a huge win here against TCU, even though they're playing at home. So I got TCU improving to 4-3. Next game is on the road at West Virginia on October the 25th. West Virginia, they may be a solid team this year. I don't know if they're getting talked about as potentially being a dark horse in the Big 12, but they're kind of quiet. So, and playing on the road in Morgantown is a pretty tough place to play. I think it's another one of those games where TCU probably slips up, and I think I'm going back and forth here on this prediction for TCU. I mean, they're going to play their good games and they're going to play their bad games at times, but yeah, West Virginia, I think this will be a competitive game, but I think it's a fairly pretty even matchup, and I think West Virginia playing at home, that's probably the difference. I'm going to go with Mountaineers here to get the win. So that does give TCU their fourth loss of the season. So they're sitting at 500 here going into the month of November. All they need is just 2 wins to get to a bowl game. They get their second bye week finally before playing Iowa State at home on November 8th. I already done my Iowa State video, and I did pick TCU here to pull off the upset. Iowa State's going through some, question marks at the wide receiver position. Rocco Beck is back at quarterback, but this offense, maybe it doesn't have a passing game. They're probably going to have to rely on the running game a little bit more. So this might be a game where both teams probably try to run the football here. I got to go with TCU though. I think coming out of a bye week and after a loss to West Virginia, they were probably looking ahead to that Iowa State game from 2 weeks, and I think TCU definitely gets the win here. So I think this will probably be their biggest win on the schedule. I mean, I think their biggest games on this schedule are North Carolina, Arizona State, Kansas State, West, probably Iowa State, and then BYU. And they play BYU next year on the road on November 15th. And, they're playing actually like the three top contenders, in my opinion, in the Big 12, all on the road this year. BYU next, though. This is going to be an experienced BYU team, just like Arizona State is. They're going to be a pretty tough team to beat, and also this is on the road. So I think TCU is going to have a pretty tough time in this game. Jake Radcliffe is back at quarterback, and I do trust him a lot more than, Josh Hoover at quarterback. So I think BYU gets the win. I think it's competitive maybe in the first half, and then second half, that's where the Cougars will pull away. And then they play another road game against Houston on November 22nd. So they got back-to-back road games, and obviously it's very tough to win back-to-back road games in the Big 12. Houston, though, I think is going to be a lot better this year. Willie Fritz in his second year. You kind of expect this Houston team to be somewhat of a bowl-type team this year. Not a dark horse team in the Big 12, but definitely a team that can make it to a bowl game. I think the addition of Connor Weidman at quarterback is a little bit of an upgrade in the passing game. So with that being said, I think this will be a competitive game, and after TCU coming off that loss to BYU, they're probably a little bit beat up after playing that physical BYU team, and I think they come in here and they slip up again. So I think Houston actually beats TCU, and that does drop the Horned Frogs now to 5-6. Going into the final game of the season at home against Cincinnati on November 29th, and obviously TCU is going to have to win this game in order to make it to a bowl game. And I think they do just that. Cincinnati, I think, will be a little bit better this year. I think this game will be competitive. I think it will probably, come down to the wire because TCU's season is on the line. But I think the Horned Frogs, with their season on the line here, to not end their season right away, they will make it to a bowl game and get that 6th win. And they get a much-needed bounce-back win after back-to-back road losses. So I think TCU gets the win. They make it to a bowl game. And I got this team finishing 6-6 in 2025. So yeah, definitely a big step back from where they were last year. I mean, I can see this TCU team doing a much better job than that 6-6 record. They can probably go 7-5 at best, or maybe probably 8-4. I mean, they could probably go 8-4 again, but this is a pretty tough schedule. You got North Carolina in the non-conference. You also got SMU. Wouldn't be shocked if they probably did start off 1-2 on the season with losses to North Carolina and SMU. And then they got Arizona State, Kansas State, BYU, and Iowa State, 4 of the top contenders in the Big 12 from last year. And, those 3 out of those 4 games are on the road. So those are going to be really tough games there for TCU to win. But you never know. The Big 12 is wide open, and anything can happen in this conference. And I also wouldn't be surprised if they did slip up against Baylor as well. But I got this team getting to a bowl game barely at 6-6 for 2025. So that's my prediction for TCU. Do you guys agree or disagree? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below and give me your prediction for TCU as well. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.